Let's say you found a scene in which a kid jumped out, and now you have assured yourself that in these situations, the Waymo driver is performing a lot better than humans, that it can detect the kid jumping out much earlier, just when their first finger is entering the scene. It has superhuman response time. You did all of that crazy engineering. But now you're like, can I do this in rain? Can I do this when it's foggy in San Francisco? If your strategy was, let me wait till there's the right amount of fog and a kid is jumping out while I'm driving, that's another 10 years. Product is very well tuned to one of the hardest problems in AI. What does good look like? This has been a common skill in very different epochs of product management. But now in AI, it's even more critical to articulate what good looks like.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Skip Podcast. I'm your host, Nikhil Singhal. And if you've ever taken a Waymo, you kind of know you're living in the future. You know, what was commonplace today, which self-driving cars, was just sheer unimaginable 10 years ago. Now, imagine being a PM back at the beginning. How did you measure progress? How did you motivate yourself when it was years and years away from having a viable release? So I sat down with my friend Saswat Panigrahi. He's a member of our community and had a product at Waymo for almost 10 years. He's been there from the beginning and really helped me understand, how do you measure good when there's no dashboard to check? What does leadership look like when titles don't matter? I mean, obviously promotions aren't based on specific market wins. They're based on competence, courage, compassion, and the daily habits that Saswat hires for, which is curiosity trained to the point of failure. Part of the reason I like thinking through how Waymo solved product management is they solved what I consider to be one of the hardest problems out there, driving a car. Yet AI today is trying to solve equally ambitious problems, like in healthcare as an example. So their playbook could be highly illustrative as to how we should operate in product management in some of these top-notch, very ambitious AI labs and AI companies. So this conversation is recorded live in front of our Skip Coach community of product leaders. So head over to skip.coach if you'd like to apply. Let's get into the discussion right after a word from our sponsors. Quick word from today's sponsor, Firecrawl. If you're building with AI agents, you've probably hit the same wall. Your agent needs data from the web, but the right pages are difficult to find, buried in JavaScript, or blocked behind logins. Firecrawl is a web data API that lets agents search, scrape, and interact with the web at scale and get back clean, structured data they can actually use. Over 1 million developers build on it. It's open source and it's free to start. Stop fighting the web for data and start powering your AI agents and apps with Firecrawl at firecrawl.dev. Use code THESKIP to get 10K free credits today. That's THESKIP. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Skip podcast episode with Saswat from Waymo. Saswat is a good, dear friend of mine who I've known for a number of years. He's part of our Skip group, and this is one of a series of deep dives into how product building works at some of the most iconic companies, in today's tech world. And I can't think of a more beloved product than Waymo, a more interesting product than Waymo. And, Saswat's one of the few leaders who have hit 10 years plus at the same kind of product line. But boy, 10 years ago, Saswat, Waymo's product looked very different than it does today. So welcome to the show. And maybe that's a good starting point. I'd love to know, what was it like in the early days? On the call today, we have some folks that are watching over YouTube, and you'll see some questions that'll pop up. And today's just a great conversation just to reminisce on the early days, but mostly just to talk about what are your thoughts around how product is shifting, how other functions are shifting, and what's it like to build hardware, software, products that are very AI forward. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation, but I love those early day stories. So, share with me what it was like when you joined and what you work on these days.
Thank you, Nicole. It's a great opportunity. Glad to be here with you, and thanks for everybody listening in. Yeah, so actually, when I joined, it wasn't yet Waymo formally. So it was a Google self-driving car project. We were in the Google X building, and we were small area. You could literally see the entire team on the same floor. And yeah, we were just folks who had this strong belief that majority of the collisions that we're having to live with, which is crazy number of deaths that are still happening on the roads today, could be dramatically changed with fully autonomous driver. So that core belief, I think, took us through many ups and downs. Even if there were sort of micro setbacks. So in those early days, it was just a general theme that regardless of what your position level was, what your title was, you would do what is essential to move the next milestone, even if it may be something as simple as, oh, I just want the car's computer not to go down every 3 hours. So even if it was something very small, we were far off from being a consumer product. We were far off from having removing the driver. It was super early days. And that was a great sort of initiation of what product management looks like. So it was really good to be able to set up the function early on. But the sort of red line through all of this was every Waymo employee and every person who is behind this mission will do whatever they can to move us forward to the next milestone. And I think when I joined, product was less than 5 people, and we basically were willing to do whatever was necessary. So we have done things like written some of the first data pipelines, the basic dashboarding, which was required us to become pseudo data scientists and building a lot of the initial tooling that the rest of the company would use just to function. We had to clean the lasers sometimes because back then the early lasers would have some accumulation over them. We would sometimes carry the release, the literally the onboard driver release, from the floor where we were building them down to the garage where the cars would be stationed. But I think that allowed some of the early product employees to have just such a holistic view of the product so that you are not doing product management or program management or design or data science through a screen of a computer. You actually feel all the rough edges. So when somebody says, once we get to 1,000 cars, we need to be able to push releases better. It's not a theoretical concept to it because you've literally carried the release in your hands to the car. So you're like, yes, absolutely, this is not going to scale when we get to 1,000 cars. I got to, build a much more scalable system. So that was one. The second theme I would highlight, and it has gone through a few evolutions, is how much pain does the product team feel for whatever was amiss, either in design or in implementation or in rollout. And feeling that pain, I feel, is an essential element of product leadership. Whether it's feeling the customer's pain, in other, in my previous roles out before Waymo, listening to a live customer call when the customer is actually angry, calling back the customer who you have let down and apologize to them and hear out how it felt from their side. Being at if it's a B2B business, going to the customer side where you may have caused an outage and actually see the, challenges you caused and how much business you made your customer lose, sort of being there to experience the pain, I think is a critical attribute. Everybody agrees product leadership needs to have, and any product manager needs to have empathy for the customer. But I think over time it has gotten diluted sometimes. You got to actually feel the pain. You actually got to feel the wrath of the gaps that your product has. And I think that is something we try to work on very early on at Wave.
These days, a lot of the, evolution of AI is based on promise. A lot of our conversations, in the last few years have been, the arrival of AGI. And many, many, many people listening on this call are working on problems which have a hypothetical future that might be half a decade or a decade from now, where the world will be quite different. I think at Waymo, you have actually experienced a decade of theoretical vision that motivates you, much like today we talk about AGI. I'm curious, in those early days, half a dozen PMs, everyone's on the same page, knowing that you were years and years and years away from a consumer product, how did you motivate your team? And generally, how do people kind of come day in and day out, knowing that you're very far from something that people can touch and believe in?
Maybe a simple way to capture that is head in the clouds, but feet on the ground. It's a little bit of an oxymoron, but I do believe that that's pretty crucial for any kind of objective of, you know, great importance that you're pursuing. Because great things do end up taking time and through multiple setbacks and so on. So you do need to have a pretty clear vision of once you're successful, there may be many probabilities of why you will not be successful, but at least you got to be able to convince yourself that after all of those headwinds, when you're successful, what does that universe look like? And why is that universe dramatically better than wherever we are? Because if it's not dramatically better in that low probability of success, then it may not be worth all the, pain and challenges and tribulations that you go through. And that mission has to be almost semi-spiritual in some ways, because it has many streams to it. We will talk about later about career. Like, why should any person, whether it's in your own org or someone else, be motivated by it? Through all of the challenges that they will go through. It has to be something that has to pull them beyond making it into L6 or L7 through the performance review. It has to be something that is beyond, or I'll score better on the MMLU benchmark. It has to be something beyond, my title will be made VP. There has to be something that pulls you in that mission greater. And I do believe that clearly applied to Waymo. And I think while there were many uncertainties on the path we take, that vision was super clear. But I would say for any different, even if you are a small team in a very large company, you mentioned Meta or Google, I do believe it's critical that the product leader or the leader GM of that unit takes the time to define that. Sometimes we sort of rush into implementation because we feel like, hey, there could be other pressures that make us rush into implementation. But somewhere at the back of your mind, there has to be that clear vision as to why people should go through unnatural pain and unnatural uncertainty, go deliver that. And in your founders do a great job at that. But articulating that vision, which is the head in the clouds part, is critical. But stopping there is insufficient because there will be moments in which you do, especially with a growing organization, you got to, so let's say you created that energy in the system by providing that clear vision and you filled people up with energy. Now you got to channel that. Otherwise it could be Brownian motion, right? So you need to have tracks, and great product leaders always have this capability of inspiring vision, but then very quickly channeling that energy into 3 tracks, 4 tracks. And of course, you change the tracks along the way, you change the metrics along the way as the company evolves. But pure visionary types often struggle at that second part. So in fact, the bigger the vision, the more crucial you have laid the breadcrumbs along it. So you're like, oh, you would love that there are 5,000 vehicles carrying people. Let's make one car go autonomous. Let's remove the test driver from just one car. Let's work back from what are the things that need to be true. And you will unpack many things like, well, the computer needs to be, this capable. Well, the sensor needs to self-clean. It needs to be able to handle this level of reliability it needs to detect pedestrians at this accuracy. So you will unpack all of that, and it's very, very precise. So oftentimes the challenge, and this goes to hiring as well, how do you find people who have built both of those? Almost left brain, right brain. Great vision, articulated vision, but ability to break it down into small things that you can answer. What do you need to get done by next week? What do you need to get done by next month? So that it's not a vague, arbitrary path to that goal.
When you look back over the time period, was there ever a moment when you question whether or not this product, like today we see it as almost magical, but anytime a magical product comes out, there must be moments of pause, moments of questioning, moments of concern that perhaps this thing is just never going to get all the way through. And my hunch is, there's the old adage that the last, 10% of any project takes 90% of the time. I suspect you've been on that problem set for many, many, many years. Was there any times when you thought about maybe this is only going to go so far and never get all the way through?
Oh, Nikhil, I mean, there was some bit of that voice all along in some ways, even when I joined Waymo. I think because it was, as I was mentioning, it was not Waymo. You can imagine in 2016 telling people that, instead of people driving cars, cars will drive people felt pretty crazy, even if now it's a pretty accepted reality. You can imagine what was AI back then. We were, of course, already back then using what was the frontier of AI, and we have remained on the frontier of AI all along. So, for example, 2017 is when Transformers came out. Transformers were driving the car back in 2017 for us. So we've persistently stayed at that frontier. But still, the vision was so far out that, oftentimes people would ask, new joinees to the self-driving car project, what, you had this clearly linear or spiral career path in which you were clearly growing in some other team or some other company. Why is it that you are choosing Waymo at this stage? How does it make sense from a career standpoint even? But I do believe that it was just such a powerful mission again that it convinced me. So I was confident it would convince other people. But yeah, along the way there were many signals of complete setback or complete failure. And again, that I would say in the longer horizon, it's a positive sign. If you're joining a team in which that isn't happening, I would begin to worry what's the moat. So some failure is an essential component, but definitely on the journey of Waymo, there were many big ones. Maybe I'll choose one technological one and one more on the product and user acceptance one. So the technological one, there were many along the way. How do you even measure? Let's say you have, through all of your skill, all of your resources, you've built the driver that can, safely drive itself. How do you know that you've built it? Many AI functions are facing this today. Let's say you built an AI agent that can take on a good amount of the accounting burden of a small business. Because small businesses they're not accounting graduates. They want to build their pizzeria. They want to build their, small app. They don't want to deal with all the accounting. So let's say you have agent that solves this accounting problem or the legal problem for them, or at least simplifies it. How do you know it's good enough, right? And there's almost this philosophical problem that all the difficulty in knowing what's good enough, like if you knew perfectly what's the right driving behavior in every situation, you've already solved the problem. So there's this counterintuitive, almost circular challenge. So there were many things along the way in which we were making the evaluator harder, and then we had to make the driver catch up. And then when the driver got better, the evaluator needed to catch up to be a good amount of a challenge or a critic for the driver. So on that, there were tremendous frontier challenges, like how do you make rain inject in a scene? Let's say you found a scene in which a kid jumped out, and now you have assured yourself that in these situations, the Waymo driver is performing a lot better than humans, right? That it can detect the kid jumping out much earlier, just when their first finger is entering the scene. It has superhuman response time. You did all of that crazy engineering. But now you're like, can I do this in rain? Can I do this when it's foggy in San Francisco? If your strategy was, let me wait till there's the right amount of fog and a kid is jumping out while I'm driving, that's another 10 years. Can you, in a realistic enough manner, inject rain into previously observed scenes? That scene realism problem, I think now people are seeing it with, sort of video engines, but having that balance of realism, but appropriate challenge, pose realism, these were frontier challenges 5-6 years ago, for which we didn't even have the vocabulary to explain that. So I think on that, there were tons of failures. There were statistical challenges because you were measuring things at such a rare rate that just statistical methods begin reaching their boundary in some ways. Um, there's a user maybe acceptance example I'll choose as well. After almost 5 or 6 years, when I had the conviction and many of the early Waymo employees had taken rides, we were getting the sign that, wow, not only is this safer, I actually love this product. I would replace my own sort of journey with this. I was beginning to get that sign. And that was a positive moment already. But how do you know that a regular person who's not as invested in the product will actually accept it? After years and years of R&D, how do you convince yourself of that? So I was lucky to be in the situation that with our UXR team, that's part of the product organization, we actually went to the living room of the first few people who we were trying to recruit into, taking our first rides. Because it was like a big event. You were telling them, hey, Will you be willing to be in a fully autonomous car? There'll be nobody in the front seat. So the whole family would show up at the living room for whoever was the one person that was volunteering. So I remember this event in which we foresaw that this will be a key user acceptance moment. So we sent a form. They said, yes, I want to be in a car without anybody in the front seat. Then we went to their home with the whole family and explained to them the whole sequence of, hey, this morning you will show up at this place in Phoenix. An empty car will come and pick you up. They said, yep, we're good. That morning when they showed up, before the car came, I did part of the briefing saying, hey, this is what's going to happen, but we are with you. Just hit this button. We'll be on the call with you if there's anything going wrong. And then we're waiting outside this Airbnb in Phoenix where this user experience study is happening. The car pulls over without anybody in the front seat. And the person who we have been briefing for 3 weeks now holds my arm saying, hey, there's no driver. So that was a key moment of how new this experience was, that all the words we could tell people were still not fully preparing them for it. But in the complete contrast to that, when they entered, so about 4 minutes into the ride, we called into the car and said, hey, is everything going okay? And they were like, this is magical. Don't worry about it. I'm relaxing here. Chill out. You should chill out as well. We're good. And that was a great moment to know for something we're so nervous about, that people actually just love the experience from the get-go.
Yeah, it must have been so rewarding for that day to happen for the team. It's kind of like the rocket launch for the first time. For many of the people that are outside of these sort of big cities and tech hubs like, Austin and San Francisco, they're actually not as familiar with the sort of self-driving car, the product that Waymo has, and some of the other competitors that are in the space. You probably more than most humans on Earth have studied driving rates, accident rates, regulatory challenges around roads and driving. Maybe just take a minute as sort of a domain expert on this whole area. What is your take on safety and autonomous? Is it situationally better? Is it at this stage always better? Would you want your kids to always be in an autonomous car if that's possible? Do you want your kids to learn how to drive? I'm just curious, as an expert in the field, what's your counsel?
I genuinely was shocked when I entered this field of how we have come to accept just 40,000 deaths happening every year on US roads from largely preventable collisions. And globally, that number is 1.2 million. If you include injuries that change your lifetime, completely, modify how you live and people around you, that number is even larger. And once again, for a majority of them, they are preventable. That trend through other technologies than autonomy was getting better, but now it has started spiking up again. My guess is it's because of people being more distracted with phones and cell phones and so on. So us accepting something of that magnitude is already pretty crazy to me. It would be the equivalent of a plane falling off the sky, every few days or so. So just us accepting that, we would not accept that in many other forms of utility that we do. But we've gotten numb to that. So I think that already is a strange, setup to go into it. For many years, we had the hope that autonomy can fix that. And we're getting some initial indications because we could see that we could react faster. We could see that with 360 degrees, multiple times a second, looking at the scene, which, human can't. We could see these early indicators that we can be safer. Same thing when you're looking for parking, right? When you're looking for parking, your head is physically turned towards the side of the road where you're looking at parking. So you're clearly disadvantaged to see something, that's coming in quickly from the left. Whereas a 360-degree combination of LiDARs, radars, and cameras is much better suited to sort of respond to that. But now you don't even have to go by the belief of the people who are working on it. There's empirical data. So we have already 220 million miles of data without anybody in the front seat. Every week, we're driving 6 lifetimes of driving. That's the scale we have today. And in that, we're able to show that we're able to reduce severe injuries by 16 times. So it's not 16% better than human, it's 16 times better than human. So, it's complete contrast to this huge human tragedy we've taken for granted. And now I'm telling you, we have a solution that's 16 times better than the status quo. So I'm completely convinced that this is answer humanity needs really, really bad. And again, when we started, I would have taken 16% improvement because it was such a stark challenge. All of us know somebody who's been affected by it. The ride I take to my office from home using Waymo every single day, I see white bicycles commemorating where, serious tragedies happened, even in our immediate area. So I do believe this is, my kids take Waymos, have been taking Waymos for multiple years now. So I'm completely sold. And you were touching upon the regulatory part. One thing I have found, I've met everybody from local police all the way to the White House over these years, including international governments, wherever people's political initial parameters may be or initial belief system may be, you know, everybody has had to deal with this tragedy in one way or another. And I think that's a unifying theme with which we can draw people who may be in very different parts of, how important this is to them, what their initial viewpoint is. The local police or the local fire department has had to pull people out of wreckage, so they instinctively understand what the value of a 16 times better human driver is. So yes, I feel super passionately about this. You were touching upon 10 years. I didn't forecast I'll be here 10 years, but that mission to where we started the conversation has kept me in there. And the nature of the problem we've had to solve has changed every few years. So the learning curve has also been pretty steep.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a powerful and, emotional kind of realization. And frankly, one of the more fulfilling career moments that, I would have for any of the folks that come on this podcast. But, maybe we'll double click on the last thing you said, which is how the role has changed. My observation, and one of the things I love about Waymo is, and you already signaled, it's an AI forward role. It's also a hands-on role from both product and just generally. But what I would guess, and you correct me, but in the first handful of years, a lot of the work was in building and going from, sort of 0 to 1, 1 to 2, when, getting it into consumers' hands was at 100. And then there's another phase where it was to scale, first city to second city to third city, no driving at night, rain, no rain, those kinds of things. Now it's almost like an evangelism, like convincing those that are fearful, convincing those that are nervous about what this means for other aspects of society, et cetera. I'm interested, and then, of course, there's the hardware piece. It's a software product, it's a hardware product, is it both, is it neither? I'm just, as a product leader who's building a kind of an organization beyond just product management, what were the skills that you found were sort of durable, that make up a great Waymo person, but beyond the belief, the cloud, feet on the ground? What were the skills that are durable? And then what are the things you had to bring in, you had to add as the company hit these different inflection points?
So this is almost like, how do you lead in under extremely high uncertainty in a way? And outside of Waymo, many of these companies that you're referencing, as people are trying to solve very hard problems, you have to start with the hypothesis, but be willing to change, your trajectory repeatedly. But there are a few things I have found to hold constant through this and sort of serve you along the way. There's a nice saying by Ed Markham, I think it's a poem, that for all of your days prepare, when you're the anvil bear, when you are the hammer strike. So each day, it's also when you ask a personal trainer, what should I do in the gym? They tell you, train till the point of failure, so that you're truly building muscle or flexibility or whatever you may be trying. So it's critical, if in doubt, build a skill that's hard for you. So let's say even if you're just scrolling Twitter, catching up, and you saw, AMD is building a new, AI chip. Let's say that piques your interest. You may not know exactly how going deep into that topic will help you. There may not be a straight line from that, but it piqued your interest. But go just until the point of failure in that, as opposed to the scrolling of Twitter. Pick one, any one of them. And sometimes it's unclear how this will help. But over time, if every single day you have built some skill, some piece of knowledge to the point of your failure, that is experience that compounds. And so in the work context, in the Waymo context, there was a time when, for example, it turned out that between Mountain View and San Francisco, the type of moisture that was accumulating on our lasers was slightly different. I didn't know. I realized it while cleaning the sensors. I'm like, okay, this takes more cleaning, that takes less. I ended up trying to learn that. You could have argued that won't have very huge practical utility because of my role. But somehow I do believe that today, when thinking about long horizon hardware investments or long horizon decisions, that grounding helps appreciate why, for example, one engineer may be advocating for something, whereas the supply chain and manufacturability person may be advocating for something else, whereas the software person may be like, I just need the data earlier to train. So just that empathy that we talked about earlier on, that empathy, instead of being superficial, being deep, is crucial. It also goes to hiring. Clearly you hire a ton as the company grows. There's a huge difference between somebody, when two people tell you they have 15 years experience or 20 years experience, they can be two very different archetypes. One can be having done the same experience repeated 20 years over and over, but the other one could be this person who has challenged themselves to the point of failure every single day. So it's like 1.01 to the power of 365 to the power of 20, right? Like that is a very different kind of leader. So distinguishing when two people on CV look similar, but which one has every single day tried to train themselves, I think is a crucial differentiation. And yes, even their starting hypothesis in your organization could turn out to be wrong, but they have clearly accumulated a breadth of skills to be able to adapt if the input parameters changed. So I'd really look for that skill in others, try to sort of keep that up in myself and all the leaders we have. And similarly, sort of responding to events, one of the reasons we have on call is those are moments of spiked learning and pushing yourself to the point of failure and learning something, even if it may not be super obvious how that helps you in the job. It keeps you better trained. It helps build trust and respect. Because I think, again, as the org is growing, you can give somebody a title, you can promote them to a level, you cannot make people follow them. Like, you can hire a new VP, you can hire a new director, you can promote somebody, but people need to follow them for your objective to be achieved. And that followership comes first and foremost from competence that's built every day. Second, from courage. And third, from compassion, in my view.
Jira is where agent speed meets team intelligence. Assign any task to your favorite coding agent and see exactly what it's doing without ever leaving your flow. And when something stalls, you're not digging through logs. You can see what's running, unblock what's stuck, and stay in control at scale. Best of all, your agents never start cold. Jira's teamwork graph feeds them context from across your entire stack, delivering 44% more accurate results with 48% less token usage. So the work they pick up is the right work, done right the first time. Try it free at jira.dev. That's JIRA.dev. When you look at candidates in the last couple of years, they are armed with knowledge as a service, an infinite ability to sort of be curious and bottom out. How does someone demonstrate that curiosity in the age of AI? Or maybe another way of describing it, if you're coaching folks to sort of explore said curiosity using today's tools, what are the things that you've seen that really impress you?
One question we like to ask is, just describe the hardest thing you have done. Because the tool you may have employed to solve that, hardest problem could be raw grit. It could be that you demonstrated flexibility to pick up whatever was the frontier tool at that moment. Today it's AI. In the past, it could have been some other process optimization. So the tool may have changed over time, but what does not change is what was the grittiest thing you had to do? What, did you simultaneously show just raw grit and stubbornness to not give up on the problem? Because pursuing something like Waymo requires a good amount of that. And then at the same time, almost this reverse, extreme flexibility in the tool you adopt. So you need the stubbornness of being on the mission, and in parallel, a flexibility of adopting whichever tool is necessary, because the problem is so uncertain that you may need to switch tools multiple times. And today, for example, there are many ways to quickly demonstrate that. Even in the context of an interview, you can give somebody a problem and you can see how many different things they try and how fluent they are with the tools. But in my view, fluency in the tool is an easier thing to build. It's not a given, requires continuous practice, requires continuous application, but it's an easier thing to build than that inherent willingness and hunger to learn. Because if the former is there, even if the tools dramatically change in a year, you will not have to push them to adopt that. They will demonstrate that capability. So, for example, in one thing we do in the product organization here is we may sometimes skip our all hands, but what we do is once or twice a week, we have a learning series. So one leader from either product management or technical program management or strategy or design, just with very low prep, comes and shares with the entirety of the org, this is what I learned last week, or this is what I had to apply last week. And that makes learning like a primary order bit for the whole team, because that itself is a celebration. So it's not only, hey, here's our vision, here's our goals for the end of the year. It's like, this is what I learned. Because that's the one constant we will continue to hill climb on, regardless of how goals shift, whether setbacks happen, and so on.
Is that exactly the same skill that you look for to build the accountability and the experience to sort of both in hardware, software, real time? You know, the thing about Waymo is the stakes are super high on failure. It's not just a pure software product. It requires a very complex set of system level understanding, and it's obviously a very, very sizable, product with a long duration. So we've covered the duration piece, faith, courage, those kind of points. And you've covered the curiosity to go after a problem that has essentially never been solved before, right? That's a big ingredient. But how did you dial in the skills for both the hardware, software prowess? How did you get the product team to own something where most people when they interviewed, they'd, worked on, email client, or they've worked on a B2B server or some engineering backend system. And now you're talking about putting kids in cars. Like, how did you end up like determining these people would be good folks in your organization to own such a sizable and heady problem?
So one small thing you touched at the very end there, it's a super exciting product, but it's also a tremendous amount of responsibility because you got to sleep in the night knowing that you approved a piece of software to be pushed where kids will enter. So that's a huge weight. And I think looking for integrity is pretty crucial as well. So you need to know that this is an extremely ambitious person with all the grit, the stubbornness, but also the willingness to change tool sets. But in the end, after all of that effort, they were to become aware, you know what, there is a gap. Unfortunately, a gap crept in. They would have the courage and the moral fortitude and the integrity to say, I'm sorry, folks, I'm not comfortable with this being pushed. That is critical to be able to take that moment, step back. So I think integrity really, really matters. And we've tried to do that through not so mix of skills. So there are people at Waymo, ex NASA, people who have actually sent rockets. So to bring that culture, there are aeronautical folks from a safety culture. So a huge diversity of fields to draw upon brings some of that. But then also being able to tie them together, right? So for example, somebody coming from a rocket background may say, we will push the software every 2 years. But there may be folks who may have come from a more internet, technology kind of background. They're like, we'll push the software every day. The answer, of course, lies somewhere in between and sort of coming up with the processes. But to answer your question on the hardware software part first, so we, again, try to have some diversity in the team. So we have PMs in the group who are PhDs in photonics, as an example, and then went on to run businesses and so on. But in their background, if you look at it, one way to look at it is you should be a PM by choice, not by necessity. So you should have sufficient bedrock of skills in other domains that you could be dangerous in other fields as well. But you chose to become a PM. It was not a necessity. So by mixing people with PhDs in photonics, incredible data backgrounds, incredible software backgrounds. So maybe individually we are not strong enough to span hardware, software, 5-year forecasting versus this week's release. But together as a team, and because we're reinforcing each other's learning every single week, to that learning series. So the person who made a prediction that 3 years from now, for this long lead time supply chain component, I need to book 10,000 of them. And let's say they got it miserably wrong because it's so hard to predict 3 to 5 years ahead, especially in the early days of Waymo. They stand up in front of the rest of the product team and say, these were my inputs. I studied how the hardest supply chains in the world plan. I went and studied how automotive does it. I went and studied how aeronautics does it. I, talked to the best experts in the field. Based on all of that, this is the number I came up with. And this number turned out wrong. I apologize for having spent all of your time on this. This is what I learned. But think of that person. Would I trust that person to make the next prediction? Or would I trust the person who hasn't gone through that misery over and over again, through that pain and learning over and over again? And now they brought up the learning of the whole crew in terms of how to begin dealing with these huge uncertainties. So I think diversity of talent, waiting to hire the, really, really solid talent, the best of the field that you can find, dealing with low performance cases, never assume your hiring is perfect, and then just making sure that each day the organization is getting better at some jagged frontier of where the knowledge is just not even been created yet.
Other than skills, there's a question around metrics over the years, particularly in the early days. And, I'm sure that there's some obvious metrics that made sense, around quality. You mentioned the sort of AI eval systems, et cetera. But like now that you kind of look back, it's very easy in a complex hardware system that Waymo is to get lost by hundreds of metrics as you're trying to maximize, et cetera. What's your counsel now that you've gone through it as to how to drive success for something that's long term through the sort of quantitative metrics that you need in order to drive an organization, signal progress, et cetera? What's your philosophy around how to introduce the right ones and maybe avoid the wrong ones? Or how do you get less is more to work out?
Yeah, great question. And Nikhil, I would say that is a continuous problem as well, because whatever metric may have worked for you, early stage of company is sometimes grossly insufficient later on. But even within the same epoch of a company, it changes because you realize either the fidelity of the metric was not, the appropriate amount. It was clearly understandable, but not hill climbable. Like it was not operationally available. So people can, let's say revenue. Clearly, revenue works as a great sort of outcome metric, but revenue is not something people hill climb on. They hill climb on, is the product being accepted properly? So this balance, there's always this push and pull. There's incontrovertibility of a metric as being good for the company, right? Potentially something like these outcome metrics have that, but they're not as useful to give to a team hill climb on this. So having that balance in each of the metrics, the way I visualize it is a tree of metrics. So the top node of the tree can be some outcome metric. So for example, later in years, it can be a financial metric, but early years, it can be much more so very directly with your mission. How many miles did you make autonomous? How many trips did you make autonomous? How many people, signed up for this service could be that top metric. But that is almost can become a pure vanity metric over a period of time. Once it's naturally growing, right? Like once you are hitting that product market fit, just refreshing the metric button can become a vanity metric. And now you don't even know, did you actually earn that? Or was it just the, momentum that's driving that? So there it becomes much more critical. Okay, what are the tight metrics? What are the things once again, what are the metrics at the edge of failure for the product? And I think that requires continuous refinement. And the org should build itself almost to have org leaders, PMs, or others associated with a metric. So for example, if you have a pipeline of multiple AI models, there's a version of what's the eval of that model-specific eval. Then there is the end-to-end pipeline's task-specific eval metrics, and you continuously refine them because those metrics are not static. Those metrics themselves have precision and recall issues. Like they may be false flagging failures that are not real failures. So this is almost like we do have pure eval PMs. Their entire job is to increase the fidelity of the metrics so that the other teams can be held appropriately accountable, not just accountable, but they have something to hill climb on. So I think it's a pretty hard job, but the way to sort of quality control your own sort of setup is, do you have a tree of metrics that you can trace down and at least have a belief? First, check directionality. Can you at least say that if this metric increases, it's good for you or bad for you? Sounds incredibly obvious, but sometimes when you look at a team or an AI model and you're like, great that you have this, chart of 36 metrics. Can you at least tell me that all of these have directionality properties, that higher is better? Or you're like, oh, I don't know. So I think directionality is pretty critical to establish. Then the slope, like, do you really care about this 20% better translates to 20% better in your outcome metric? But having that tree of metrics, pretty crucial. I think you were beginning to allude to that. How do you make sure that you didn't do a union of your data scientists wanted these metrics, your PMs wanted these metrics, the engineers really like these metrics? So you're like, you know what? Sounds great, folks. Put all of them in a union list. And now it's like 37 metrics, and you lost sort of the intellectual control over those metrics. So a PM and a data scientist and an engineer sort of team have a good amount of judgment. And you know what? Yes, we'll evaluate the 36 metrics, but these 5 go on the big screen. I think there's a good amount of judgment in that as well.
Let's wrap up a little bit around 2 big topics. One, career guidance from your vantage point, both from a leadership point of view and from AI. I think the leadership point you alluded to slightly earlier, where you said, hey, when we see leaders, one of the things that we look for, integrity was one. Second was like, who has followed? Who have they been able to convince to follow them, given the sort of magical nature, the long-term nature of the product. As you look at the different functions and you think about nowadays, when knowledge is, more of a service, when AI is transforming org structures and we're talking about builder executives, et cetera, Waymo's been a little bit ahead of the curve for some time, because a lot of the things that we're seeing now mainstream are things that were early at Waymo. So I'm always interested in your perspective on, what's your take to how should people listening to this demonstrate their leadership if they've done it in the past, or what are the skills they should be thinking through to build? Maybe spend a few more minutes on this leadership question.
I find some good amount of stability and continuity in some of these attributes through, these massive changes that are happening. We talked about competence a bunch. So sort of continuously investing in your learning. I genuinely ask myself, even oftentimes, most of my day, I'm in meetings where people far more qualified and, competent than me in a specific field are presenting to me or to a fellow set of Waymo leaders. I do ask myself, why should these people follow? Like, eventually, why should they take my decision and accept it, or disagree and commit and execute on it? So competence remains, I would say, the topmost thing. There should be one test you can do is, are they a little bit surprised that you know that stuff? Or are they starting from 101 in that field because they're like, okay, this leader clearly doesn't understand it. Let me spoon feed all the way. And this applies to technology. Same thing, you show up for a policy meeting. Have you done the research on if this is a political appointee, when are they up for re-election? What is their key platform? So you may be meeting a policy person who can give you all that briefing on the flight. But that policy person is also looking at you saying, have you done your homework? Are you aware why you're showing up to this meeting? So competence is critical. But the second, I would say, is courage. Courage takes many dimensions. It's the idea to, stop the train when you know that something has gone wrong, despite you having put everything you got on that mission, despite you having pushed your team to put everything you got, knowing when to say, you know what, we did our best, folks, but no, this release is not going, this launch is not going. Because that builds followership, because they see the leader has the courage to make that call. The other side of it, which is critical in this day and age of AI, is agency, right? Like, do you wait for permission when you see something has gone wrong? Or do you be like, look, I may not be the best person to tackle this problem. In fact, I may be hopelessly inequipped to deal with this problem, but I see a problem and I will run towards it. And maybe I will acquire the skills along the way to solve the problem, or I'll be so miserably failing at it that somebody else will come and rescue, which is the latter is often my strategy. I'm like, look, I'm going to keep at this problem until somebody comes and rescues me. but I will not leave the problem unaddressed. If it's a problem that risks the mission, if it's a problem that's rising to the top of the user complaint list, if it's a problem that's bringing down your B2B service down, if it's a key hallucination that's really bothering and making people doubt the efficacy of your AI agent, you got to run towards it. Even if in the first few hours, you're like, what am I even doing? Am I actually making this better? Have faith that you will catch up. Have faith that other people will join you. But you got to begin with agency and run towards the worst problem you can see. And I think that is a skill. It's not so much a skill, but a habit. You run towards the worst problem. And you will, and the crazy thing is that an organization of humans is shockingly good at identifying the biggest problem. In any company, small of 10 people or 10,000 people, you can go to the lunch queue and ask them, what's the biggest frustration you all have in terms of employee productivity? They'll tell you. You ask the customer support, what's the biggest customer complaint? They'll tell you. What misses oftentimes is that goes through a crazy multi-quarter OKR planning process. Then somebody will pick it up. They're like, well, we are tapped out for this quarter. We can get to it in Q5 of next year. It is a long process. But if you have this hunger to go after the hardest problem, everybody in the organization has that courage. I think that's crucial. There are many other elements of courage as well. Disagreeing with your manager. When knowledge is so specialized, when you have done, AI has brought you that, having the courage to disagree with your manager, flagging it to your investors, those bits of courage are critical. The last thing I would say, the third, is compassion. It's almost the reverse of courage, it may seem in some ways, but I think you canceling a project because now that requires courage, because you're like, hey, I know we put a lot of effort in this kind of LiDAR or this kind of simulation technology and it didn't work out. It's time to kill this bet. That requires courage. But how you deliver it to that team, the compassion you show, the understanding you show of how many setbacks they went through, what perseverance they showed, and why you value them, even if this specific project is being canceled. I think that's a critical moment of leadership, because there are people who have the competence to know that this project needs to be stopped. They have the courage to announce it, but the way they announce it reduces followership as opposed to increase it. But if you show the empathy, you make that failure something to celebrate, because for any successful organization through this much change in AI that's happening, or in a project where success is not given at all, you want the team to be elastic with failures. Like, you want them to fail fast and go on. So each failure should be an opportunity to call out the heroes that this team, I'm congratulating them for trying out this hypothesis and trimming this or pruning this branch in the tree. But delivering it in that manner with compassion is critical to building leadership and followership.
Well, just listening to you makes me feel like I want to kind of, tie up my boots and pop over to Waymo just to hear how you think about leadership. It's very, very inspiring. This series that I've been working on really has been spending a lot of time on how, AI, particularly large language models, are really transforming how we build product, how these functions like product management and associated functions are being kind of transformed. In the remaining amount of time, I'm curious your view on what are you seeing in the last 1 to 2 years in particular about how has product development changed in your functions that work with you, and specifically tracing it back to some of these new advances. Clearly, the scale of the product also is changing the way you work with Waymo, but I'm very interested in your vantage point and obviously the counsel that you have for those that are trying to stay relevant or looking to join a company like Waymo. What are the kind of things that you're seeing and the transformations associated with it?
The first thing I'll acknowledge is I'm personally feeling constantly inadequate in sort of how up to date I'm keeping myself, how upskilled. But I take the positive in that fills me with energy to pursue that. But maybe let me take what I think would be a very widely applicable example and a specialized one. To what you were describing earlier, what AI tools have democratized now is any form of analysis that you were sort of waiting on to demonstrate that high agency. For the most part, I feel that barrier has shrunk. So let's say you're like, Look, it would be lovely to get a fully data science blessed and UXR blessed, double blind study on what this feature is having as an impact, or are people liking this, or what their top complaint is. That thing is shrinking, right? Right now, that intel gathering or research phase for many questions can be a lot faster. So right now, for example, if you just wanted to do a sentiment analysis on all the customer complaints that you got, in the past, there is still value in professionally done research on that. But if you are like, look, are people generally happy with wait times or are they unhappy with wait times? It's a lot faster right now. Right now, there's no excuse for a product leader or engineering leader to not know what their customers want. There's clearly greater finesse, greater sophistication in some of the more nuanced questions. There's clearly still incredible value in experimentation. For all of those things that, Nikhil, I know from our past conversations, which in our early days of the career was very sophisticated experimentation systems, that knowledge barrier is much, much smaller. So most excuses as to why you can't demonstrate agency in running towards the right problem, giving clarity to your teams as to this is the problem to solve, almost problem discovery and prioritization, that has shrunk dramatically. And I would very much like that, PMs aren't like, oh, I'm just the outbound PM, or I'm just the inbound PM, or I'm just with some other group, prod ops tells me what my customers want. What? Like you have to be pretty close to where the actual problem is, and the AI tools give you that empowerment, not have to be dependent or too dependent on others. And maybe you can ask better questions to the professionals who are doing UXR research. So I think that's very widely applicable. And when somebody tells me I'm waiting for the next month's report, I'm like, that month's report will have value, but why are you waiting the next 29 days? Do your quick and dirty version, begin taking action. On the much more advanced sort of version of it, we were discussing this example. Let's say you need million miles of driving on test tracks, 10 million miles of driving on public roads, and a billion miles of simulation to assert to yourself that you have this 7 nines reliability or on some area. But now you're like, oh, I got to do it at nighttime. Do you redo all of that? Or now I got to do it in rain. Do you redo all of that? Well, if we're good with pedestrians in San Francisco, would we be good with pedestrians in Piccadilly, Circus in London? These kinds of questions, having the realism of video insertion, pose rematching, realism, all of that, there's a tremendous amount of innovation happening in this area. And people who are making these inventions may not even be aware of how applicable their inventions are in, say, robotics or autonomy, or in agent validation, like agent outcomes validation, right? So I think the field is super rich. So reflecting on the hardest eval problem you have, because I think product is very well tuned to one of the hardest problems in AI. What does good look like? This has been a common skill in very different, epochs of product management. But now in AI, it's even more critical to articulate what good looks like. Because now if you can articulate that, a reinforcement learning tool can automatically hill climb to that. But specifying what good looks like remains a very challenging skill that I think product leaders should lean into, whichever domain they are in. What does good look like in healthcare? What does good look like in providing counsel? What does good look like in accounting and legal? Super hard problem, and I think huge amount of runway for anybody who wants to dive deep into that. Their careers are going to be well paying off if they lean into that problem, I believe.
That's so great. And I could talk to you for another hour just on all of your experiences and learnings from Waymo and how that dovetails into sort of modern leadership and where AI is going. I hope we get a chance to continue the conversation. This has been such a pleasure. I appreciate both your counsel and wisdom as well as your friendship over the years. And, I, for one, love the product. I think most people that are here in the Bay Area have had a chance to experience it. And it is the closest thing to magic and one of the best examples of how AI can really transform both our lives and society as a whole. So, congratulations for the success of the product and for the growth that you've seen and the vision and mission that you folks are on. It's exciting to see where things are going to go in the next 10 years. So, thanks again and appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Nicole. It was a pleasure. And thank you for everybody listening.